Hi, today we're going to talk about visual principles in education by me, Amy Coulter. And so this is also, I live in Chicago, and so if you're hearing the sirens in the background, that is why. So the big overarching theme is trying to get a better understanding of like why we use different types of visuals to enhance learning throughout different modalities. So for example, different things like images that we can use to help students with comprehension of vocabulary, or making sure that we're pairing different visuals appropriately with the content that we're instructing. So visuals are one of the many tools that we have that help amplify our learning through digital resources. It helps us understand how to incorporate these appropriately into instruction and to expand our learning and bridge our gaps towards connections, which is ultimately why we want to use them in the first place. So why visuals? It helps us store information longer. It helps we can communicate way faster through those types of visuals. It helps us understand, maybe more complex content that we may not gain understanding without them. It helps us be encouraged and motivated. And also there's a big misconception on using visuals just for the sake of the aesthetics, but using them appropriately, pairing them with So images are the simplest and most effective way to make sure that information gets stored as a long-term memory. That is the ultimate goal with learning, is that we want to make sure that that information that is being taught is going to be retained over time. So images are ultimately the most simple and effective way to make sure that information gets stored as a long-term memory. We do know that obviously with learning, there is information that we want to learn at the short term, and then also information at the long term. Images help increase the opportunity for that information to be stored for a long period of time. So these are just some tips and feedback on how can we, incorporate images and visuals appropriately. And so I'm just going to kind of go over these. So making sure that we can, minimize information and using bullet points, that's going to be a helpful way for information to get taught, and then also for it to be retained. These are also fun facts that I thought were interesting that we had in our assignments. So out of all the information that we get coming to our brain, only 90% of it is going to be visual information. So like memories, pictures, I think about those kind of things all the time, even within my own, just living. I a lot of times will think of the visual images associated with the memory that I gained from the learning experience. And as opposed to just reading a text to learn, visuals are processed 60,000 times faster. So they are actually very effective in helping us retain that information. And 40%, the whole concept of how the brain and visuals work with learning, 40% of nerve fibers that are within our brain are actually connected to our eyes, to the retinas. And so we're constantly receiving stimuli, so it would make sense that visuals within learning are going to help increase the opportunity of that, the retention of information. So, also, the human eye can register 36,000 visual messages every hour. So we think about different learning platforms that students may use to kind of help increase their learning, especially maybe students who are struggling in language or ELA and things like that. Having those programs paired with really great visuals within the learning platform is going to be an excellent way to increase learning. I also think about graphic novels. I use this as an example. When students, in my past, students who maybe had struggle reading, more complex texts would really thrive with graphic novels, because believe it or not, I think there's a misconception about whether or not graphic novels are developmentally appropriate, but they actually do contain a lot of high rigor when it comes to the language that's involved with graphic novels. So this would just be another great example of how that is used in the learning process. And then we're talking about different types of visuals that help gain knowledge for long-term memory. So I pulled up some different images of pictures. Some of them are metaphors, and then emojis. Like students love emojis, and emojis contain emotions and feelings. And when they're connected, and when we're connected to our learning, it would make sense that visual images would, bring forth emotion. Every single emoji is an emotion, right? And so when you compare that with different forms of learning, it's going to be extremely helpful for students in the long run. So yeah, and then if you really think about it, learning is a part of an engagement process. And so when students are not engaged with what they're learning, they're not going to retain the information. It has been shown that visuals are actually a really great supplement to learning, just outside of reading and doing the text, because things like videos, images, graphics, like the students really can go back to that learning experience to gain understanding, to help make those connections in their brain. Sorry, I'm learning how to navigate this as well. And then I think about students, maybe our ELL students or students who speak maybe one or more languages at home, how visuals do help them. So if you can provide different types of visuals in the classroom throughout your, whether you have different resources that you contain for different subjects to help them, obviously, it's going to help support their language comprehension, giving them different, visual aids to help them understand the content, because not only are they learning this content and information, but they're also having to bridge the language barriers that they're having as well. I saw in our research about the I Spy game, and so it was a way to kind of level into different levels of words. So I spy a red vegetable, right? And so they're having to kind of identify red vegetables. What is a vegetable? And then they go into talking about a tomato, right? And so it kind of really gives students, different opportunities to get their needs met, especially with visuals included. And these are just the 12 principles that we learned about. And so I kind of, I have the graphic here for visual appeal. And then I go through and I talk about the different ones. So we've got our multimedia principle, using words and images together to help, get the message across. We have the modality principle. So not having a lot of text on the screen when people are talking, but use different images to kind of reinforce those words. Redundancy principles. It's saying not to use narration, graphics, and text all at the same time. So making sure that there's not too much information coming across all at once. Coherence principles. So don't have a lot of fluff within your presentation and the visuals that you're using, making sure that it really is specific and it's intentional in its use. We also have the signaling principle, which is the guide. It's to help guide the learner's attention to different key points or visual cues, like maybe highlighting the words or having highlighted words or arrows or things zooming into the text that they're looking for, so that they're aware of what the focus is. And then I had to figure out how to pronounce the word, contiguity principles. So making sure that where we put the images in the information or however we're presenting it, making sure it makes sense. You don't want to have a really tiny small image and then, expect them to be able to gain from the text or whatever, the text at hand, and then also having to struggle to read the information as well. There's also going to be the segmenting principle, so making sure that we're giving them information in chunks so that they're not losing the information being presented along the way. It really does help kind of pace them out so that they can retain the information that they're being given. The image principle, which is making sure that the images are helping convey that important information more effectively. Like we've said, we don't want to have fluff within the overall information and message being sent out. And then the voice principles. So, students really do, especially in today's age, they understand who Siri is, and they understand who Alexa is, and they can tell a difference between a human voice and a robotic voice. And so making sure that the voices that they're hearing when they're learning are going to be those human generated ones with read alouds or maybe YouTube videos and things like that. We want to make sure that it's coming from a human's voice. It makes a huge difference. But let's talk about some best practices, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're creating high quality digital videos that impact our instruction, engage student learning. So here are just a few ways that we can kind of do that within our own instructional practices. First and foremost, you've got to make sure that you have a plan put in motion so that you know what to do and you're not just haphazardly trying to plan, information and just throwing things in there. So first, you want to define who this information is going to, what is the purpose, and making sure that you understand the whole, trajectory of where you're trying to go. So you want your purpose and your audience. Who is it going to and why is it going to them? You want to make sure that you have a unique selling point, right? So we always want to have something that really pulls a hook, right? We were taught as teachers that we have to have a hook to really bring them in and engage them. So, making sure that they are able to, gain that better understanding from that. And then finally, here are just some 3 rules for video creation. Avoid starting with a blank page, right? Begin with information already on your screen so that everything looks, well put together and it's able to flow well. And it doesn't look like you're starting just from scratch. Record in chunks and edit, right? So you want to make sure that as you are, in the process of creating content and recording content, take it in chunks, edit out things that are not crucial or necessary. Work on the way that we're speaking, right? As instructors and facilitators, limiting the words those are some of the things that we can work on in our editing skills, and using different types of digital resources like PowerPoint, Google Slides, Canva. All of these great resources really do help create connections for student learning, from the smallest of learners to the oldest of learners, right? And so let's prioritize using visual aids appropriately in our content instruction.